Hi guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Smash Knits and Knitting channel. My name is Ash, aka Smash, and here on this channel we like to talk about all things knitting. Now today is no exception. I will be going through all of the knitting tools and accessories that I found were flops. So just stuff that I bought with the intention of using but never did, and if I was to lose everything in my entire stash and have to start from scratch, I would not repurchase these items. Now, of course, if any of these items are your favorite or you use them all the time, that's totally fine. Everyone has their own preferences. I'm not saying these things are necessarily bad, but for me, they're just not worth the money or I just never use them. So this isn't a criticism to say that if you like these, you're wrong. It's just personally my opinion and what I like. Okay, so before we get into it, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So the first flop that I want to talk about is something that actually surprised me. I thought I would get a lot more use out of this than I actually do, and that is yarn ball holders. Now, it's exactly what you think it is. It's just literally a stick that holds your yarn and allows for the yarn ball to rotate as you pull it, so like that. I thought this would be really handy, and I thought, oh, this one even has bearings, so it spins a lot. I think I got this one from KnitPro. I got it from a yarn store that used to be open a very long time ago, and I thought I would use this so much, but every single time I try to use a yarn ball holder, it just topples over. Like every single time I pull on it, it just falls either down or off the table, and then I have to pick it up off the ground. It makes a big thud, and I worry that it's gonna like damage the wood floors. I have another one as well, a really pretty 3D printed one that I really love as well, and they both have the same issues. Like they have kind of grippy things on the bottom so that they don't slide off the table, but I just find like you have to really pull very gently, and if it's like any bit caught like it is now, it'll just topple over, and that just really frustrates me because it's meant to be something that's meant to be making my knitting life easier, and it just ends up falling over so much, and I just get sick of dealing with it. And again, like you can only really hold one ball at a time. I have tried it where I have used two balls and tried to orientate them so they're pulling at the same rate, but I get the same thing. It just gets too top heavy and ends up falling over. It's really a shame because there are so many beautiful ones. There's so many pretty ones in all different types of shapes, but I just find them really annoying. Maybe I need to find ones that are weighted, but I find that most generic yarn ball holders just don't do it for me. And there are cheaper, kind of more practical solutions or options for me. For instance, instead of using a yarn ball holder, I have actually opted to go for like these wire IKEA baskets. This is what they look like. They're just like $10 or $13 from IKEA, and I find them so helpful because I can put all the yarn in there if I have multiple balls, and if I've stopped knitting on my project, I can put the project in there and use it kind of like a little project bag. I've taken this to my local yarn store so that I can transport everything, and I just find this way easier to deal with. I just sit this right next to the couch and am able to pull from multiple balls of yarn at a time, and yeah, I just find these really helpful, and they're a great storage solution. They fit on most shelves, and they come in lots of pretty colors, and they're $10. So yeah, I would opt for getting one of these over a ball holder anytime. The next thing I have to talk about is a wraps per inch tool. So this is one here. This is a really beautiful one that I got from Crafted in Timber. There is nothing wrong with this like wraps in inches tool. It's really beautifully made. There's nothing wrong with the actual make of this, but if you're not familiar with a wraps per inch tool, essentially you take your yarn, let me see if I can do this, and you wrap it around to see how many kind of lengths of yarn, like kind of how many of these wraps you can get in an inch, and this will tell you what type of weight your yarn is. Now that sounds like something that's really useful, but I literally never use this. This sits in my knitting needle case and I never use it. I don't think I've even used it once, and I've had it for over 2 years. And that's solely because most of the yarn that I buy for a purpose, or I buy for a project, or it comes with some sort of yarn label on it. So I know what the weight of the yarn is. I'm familiar enough with a lot of yarn to be able to determine what the weight is if I have lost the label. Also, most of the time I gauge swatch. So if I'm gauge swatching and checking my gauge against a pattern gauge, then I will adjust my needle size based on that. I rarely ever need to use this. It's just for me, just a waste of money because I literally never use it. I feel like if you were someone who thrifted a lot of yarn, or has a lot of yarn that they were given to them and they don't have the labels for them, then I feel like it would be a useful tool. But for me, who most of the time is buying yarn for a project or has the labels on the yarn because it's newer yarn, I just never find the use for it. And especially me, because I log all my yarn into Ravelry, and so I log the weight on this. Even if I do lose the label, I know what it is because it's all logged into Ravelry. So the next flop that I, again, never use is blocking T-pins. So these particular ones here that have the little T at the top, and these are for using with blocking mats so that you can obviously position your knitting when it's blocking. I first bought these because I didn't want to fork out the money to get a set of combs, which look like this. These are combs. And the difference is that the combs have multiple prongs in them, whereas the T-pins are just one prong. And I never use them. Ever since getting these, I exclusively use these KnitPro combs because they're just way easier and way more functional and way quicker for me to block items, especially when it comes to sleeves or sweaters or even shawls, things like that. Because the combs have multiple teeth, I'm able to get a really nice straight line. I'm able to evenly stretch things out without it going spiky. I find the T-pins create weird tension when I use them, and they make little kind of spikes in my knitting when I block, and I really don't like that. I feel like the only use that I would have for T-pins is if I do a lot of lace shawls that require kind of spiky bits. Like I know there's quite a few West knit shawls and stuff like that that have like a spiky fringe as the border, but for me, I don't knit anything like that, so it's just not useful for me, and I just wish I had never bought those and instead went straight for the combs, because the combs are way more functional. They also have like different sizes, so you have small ones, is that? Yep. And you have obviously the long ones that I showed you before, and there's lots that come in a pack. So those to me are just way better value and way easier and way quicker too, because I'm not having to pin individual pins. And when I'm taking it all out, there's not 1,000 million little pins, especially if you have cats. I have a cat, and I feel like I just worry that I'm going to lose those singular pins and she's going to play with it and get hurt. Whereas the combs, they're larger, they're bright. I can easily spot them if they're on the ground. This next one, I feel like it's going to be a bit more controversial, but the next flop for me are these knitting gauge rulers. So these are for measuring your gauge, so how many stitches you get in 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters or 4 inches by 4 inches. And I have a couple of these. I have a 5 centimeter one, I have 10 centimeter ones, and I just never use them. They're bulky and hard to transport. They're just not practical for me, and I just never reach for them. Again, they just sit dormant in my knitting stash, and I just never use them because when I get to a part where I am knitting a sleeve or I need to measure something, like this doesn't really help me. Like this is only for gauge, this is only for swatching, and a lot of the time my swatches might only just be this size. So I find a way better investment is to just buy these cheap little measuring tapes. You can buy these in packs of 3 from any generic arts and crafts stores, $2 stores, Amazon, anywhere. You can buy them. They're so cheap and they're way more versatile than a knitting gauge ruler. Like you can easily just measure 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters or 4 inches by 4 inches with this, and they're very transportable. You can keep them in all of your little knitting notions, little bags, project bags, things like that. That's where I have them. I buy lots of them so that I can just put them in every project bag, put them in all my little notions bag, because they're just so small and handy and cheap, way more versatile, because I don't have to just measure, just gauge. I can measure the length of my sock, I can measure my length of my sleeve, length of ribbing, all that stuff, way more versatile. I wouldn't, as pretty as they are, waste your money on buying one of these things, because they can only measure your knitting gauge. Like it literally, that's all they measure. So the very last item that I would say was a big flop for me is straight knitting needles. And I feel kind of bad, like I'm a traitor for saying that, because these are obviously very associated with knitting. I feel like a lot of people start learning on straight needles and a lot of people still use straight needles. But for me, now, even in the start of my knitting journey, I just like couldn't get used to knitting straight needles when there was just more comfortable options. I feel like ergonomics is such a big thing in the knitting world, especially if you knit a lot. And I think it's way better to invest in some circular needles, whether that be short or long, interchangeable, or not. I just find that these are way more comfortable to hold in the hand. They're way more versatile, especially if you get interchangeable needles, then you can obviously change the different cable length and change the needle sizes. But even just starting out with a few of the basic, most popular sizes in these circular needles, I think are just such an upgrade versus buying straight needles. You know, I bought a lot of straight needles and I just never use them. They're kind of clunky. They're a bit harder to transport because they tend to be long. You're kind of limited in terms of the projects that you can use on them. You can really only knit flat. I just don't find them very suitable for the type of knitting that I like to do. Like, I feel kind of bad saying that, but it's tricky because a lot of patterns these days aren't written for straight needles. Like, I have not come across a pattern yet, because again, I knit modern patterns and they just don't knit many things flat. And if they do, I can knit everything flat with a circular needle. Like, I don't need straight needles to knit something flat. However, I do need circular needles to knit in the round, where I can't do that with straight needles. So they just a lot less versatile for me, and I wouldn't buy them. And if someone came to me and said, hey, look, I'm interested in learning how to knit, what would you recommend? I would never steer them towards straight needles, because my circular needles can do everything and more that my straight needles can, but they're just way more comfortable to hold in my hands. They're way easier to store. They're just better to knit with overall. And I feel bad saying that, but that's kind of the truth. So that's my last flop for today. But thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next one. And if you enjoy videos like this, or you'd like to see more content, feel free to subscribe, give this video a like. It really helps the channel. But yeah, take care of yourself, and I will see you next time.